Serviced accommodation, short lets, Airbnb, are these sort of rental models the way to maximize your cash flow from doing buy-to-let property? Well, that's the subject of this video. Stay tuned for more. But first, if you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell icon. We put out videos each and every week, all dedicated to keeping you on top of your property investing game. Now, most people that do buy-to-let rent out their properties for a long period of time. 6 months is the minimum, often lets are 1-year contracts. But short lets is where you book accommodation for a shorter unit of time, usually by the night or by the week. Now, the attractions of doing this sort of model are pretty much the same as most other types of products or services. Now, if I go to Costco and buy a massive pack of loo roll, then my unit cost per roll is relatively small. But if I go and buy a dual pack or something from a Tesco Express, then my cost per roll is going to be higher. When you buy something in bulk, or for a longer period of time, you tend to pay yet less for the unit than if you split it up into a smaller chunk of time. And we know this happens because let's look at hotels, for example, or bed and breakfasts. When you rent those out by the night, of course, if you wanted to stay there for 6 months, then a AST let would be far more appealing. So you can take a property that would let out for, say, £800 a month on an assured short hold tenancy contract for a 1-year contract and rent that property out for £100 a night on Airbnb, Booking.com, etc. So it's quite lucrative, so presumably everyone's doing it, but there's a lot to take into account, and I'm going to go into some of those issues in this video. But let me take a little bit of time out to tell you about this month's Baker Street Property Meet on Tuesday, the 30th of July, where we're actually focusing on this very theme of how to maximize your cash flow by doing short-let serviced accommodation. We're joined by 2 distinguished guest speakers who are experts in this field. The first is Joanna Carr, who is a former teacher who's built a serviced accommodation management business all around Herts, Beds and Bucks. And we're also joined by none other than Saj Hussain, who does pretty much everything in property but has a substantial serviced accommodation portfolio around the West Midlands. Now, both Joanna and Saj will be sharing their in the trenches experience and knowledge on this subject, and you will also be joined by 300 plus property investors at the UK's #1 property investors meetup. So join us there Tuesday, 30th of July. You can get your tickets at bakerstreetpropertymeet.com. Now, I gave a nice little example earlier of, say, a property that would rent for £800 a month on an AST, which is pretty much letting out for £100 a night. Now, that, of course, sounds very great, provided you're getting 100% occupancy. And I think that's the #1 mistake a lot of people make when they look at the serviced accommodation model. They do that simple calculation. How much can I get per night, as opposed to how much is it for a monthly AST contract? And they assume that occupancy levels will be 100%. One of the key things to achieving success with serviced accommodation is to make sure there's market demand for that type of property in that location. Now, you can do that by just having a look at sites like Airbnb and Booking.com and see what other similar accommodation is in your target area and looking at, well, how much are they booked up? Now, there are lots of different markets for serviced accommodation. The 2 most common ones are tourist-led and also contractor-led. If you're going for tourists, it has to be in a tourist location. Presumably not many people are going to holiday in Hull, so that might not be the best place to do it for the tourist market. But contractors are a very, very good marketplace, particularly where there are major construction projects going on like HS2. You have a steady stream of contractors who stay in these types of accommodation for more than just a few nights, and that can increase your occupancy levels quite a lot. The key to your success in the serviced accommodation business is going to get the type of property, the fit out and the area and your target market right. Then, of course, you are looking to maximize your occupancy and minimize the amount of turnover. So if you can get bookings where, for example, with contractors where they're staying for 2-3 weeks at a time, That's going to maximize your occupancy and minimize your turnover costs. Because every time you change residence, you've got a certain cost to bear to clean up the property and get the property cleaned up and ready for the next occupiers to come in. Now, if you're going to operate a service to accommodation business, you've got to change your mindset from operating a buy-to-let rental business, because service to accommodation is far more akin to the hotel and hospitality business. Reviews, of course, are very, very important, and when people are staying for shorter durations, the properties have pretty much got to be perfect on entry. I mean, there's no point having, if someone's just staying for a weekend, there's no point having teething problems with your accommodation, which means they don't get a perfect stay for their entire duration. That's going to slate you in terms of reviews and will affect future bookings, occupancy and profit levels. Running a service to accommodation business is far more operationally intensive. You've got to have good systems, you've got to have good procedures, you've got to have good people on the ground, and you've got to have meticulous attention to detail to make sure that properties are in a proper state when that guest checks in. Now, there's a little bit more compliance and regulatory issues to adhere to. In London, of course, you are restricted by the 90-day rule, in that no one unit of accommodation can be rented out for more than 90 days in a particular year, but that doesn't apply to other areas. You've also got to check with your mortgage company that they're happy with this, and also make sure that your insurance policies cover short-term accommodation use. The big thing that always trips people up is when people are doing flats, leasehold flats, as serviced accommodation units. You've got to make sure that the freeholder is on board with it and agrees to it. Because more often than not, the long lease for the flat actually says that it needs to be owner occupied, and if it's let out, it needs to be let out for longer duration, 6 months minimum. Now, the reason why freeholders get upset by this is because when you get into a flat, you've got to go through communal areas. And if new guests are coming in and out every week, and they're bringing in their suitcases and all the rest of it, that's going to leave scuffs and marks on the communal hallway, stairs, landings, and mean more upkeep costs. It's also it could involve more noise with people moving in and out and that kind of thing. And that's why freeholders of blocks of flats tend to basically not like it. Now, if you're thinking about scaling a service to accommodation business, you need to speak very early on to a financial tax advisor, because there are some VAT considerations which will affect your profitability once you go above a certain level. You need to get specialist VAT advice before going too far down the road with your service to accommodation business. In this video, I've pretty much scratched the surface on what's involved in running a successful service to accommodation short-let business. There can be great profits to be had if you go in with your eyes wide open, because it really is a different form of business to regular buy-to-lets. If you are attracted to the idea of high cash flow through short-term lettings, either by converting some of your existing buy-to-let properties to serviced accommodation, or looking at acquiring new ones, or looking at managing serviced accommodation units on behalf of other people, then your first port of call should be this month's Baker Street Property Meet, Tuesday 30th of July. We're joined by Joanna Carr and Saj Hussain, two experts in the field of serviced accommodation, to share with you their in the trenches experience and also take your questions on the whole subject. That's on Tuesday 30th of July. Join us there, get your place booked at bakerstreetpropertymeet.com, and I'll see you guys in the next video.